Hello everybody, welcome to the channel and to this new chapter, which is going to be about tissue covering the wing and starting to tissue the P51B that I'm building. So, and I've got also a new angle perspective. So I've got here the frog, just in case, I'm going to call it the mascot of the channel. Here we have a frog, which is a money box, which is great, very empty. And now, before I do the tissue covering, of course I have to decide what kind of color schemes I want, right? I do have several books. I just took out two, looking to what design I would like to use. There's this P51, this is a D model, interesting but probably very difficult to make. Just found on this other page, it's a yak being shot down by P38. Have to read the story behind that one. That's going to be an interesting one. There's a book about just some World War II aircraft of World War II, or combat aircraft of World War II. Then I've got also my favorite Rand McNally encyclopedia. There are several P51s mentioned here, but let's see if you can see it here. I don't want to zoom in too much in case, yeah, so anyhow, let's see if you can see it. Here we do have a P51B mentioned here, and the color scheme seems to be quite good. It's dark green on top, grey on the bottom, a lot of art, let's say, on it, like some nose art, some red markings and things like that. And this is the kind of things that I'm going to go for. I also have to bear in mind that I'm not very good at painting. I don't want to paint, I want to use just tissue. So that's also one of the considerations that I want to take into account together with my skills. Now I do have on the computer, I'm going to turn you up. This is a bit awkward, but bear with me. So there on the computer, if I zoom in, you're going to see a little bit, but not this image yet. Let's first of all go to this other one. I found this one on the internet, also looking for P51B. It's probably one of the earlier production ones, I'm guessing. It seems to be completely green. It might be grey underneath, which is what I'm after. Grey underside and green, dark green on top. This kind of scheme is okay. I see here that it's got like the red markings or red lines around the bars and the star, so could be good. But then I also found this other picture, and here we can see the different types. I think I'm going to go for the one at the very top. Here it says it's P51B from Tommy's dad, or Tommy's dad is the name it's got here. Major John C. Herbst, from the 75th Fighter Squadron in Luliang in 1945. I like this one because it's green, no strange camouflage markings like the British have, which actually the plan is for on the plan Towner did actually have in mind the British markings, but I'll go with American ones. And then the bottom side is grey. There's this other one, I don't know if you can see it, that has this wavy finish, which makes it much more difficult, so I'm going to probably skip that. And then this other one, which is probably in the German theatre, because I see here some German victories, let's say. Also some nose art and things like that, also straight line separation. I think I'm going to go for the top one. Somehow it suits me better. I won't go for all the detailed paintings there. I'll have to figure out how to do the star and the stripes. Just one number in the back, 40, why not? And I have here also the top and the bottom view, so it's just got some white stripes. I'm not sure how I'm going to do them, because as I say, I don't want to paint, so I might just put some tissue over, like maybe white tissue, several layers of white tissue, because the white tissue that we have for the models actually is very transparent. If I put white tissue on top of the green, it's just going to look the same, so probably several layers might be needed of that. So that's the first part of the homework, which is to figure out what design. I'm going to go with this one, which I think is doable for me without all the special things. Now the next part, let me put the books aside a little bit. I'll turn you down again. You can see the frog. I need a name for the frog actually. So let's see if I turn you down like this. Now I've got already several things that I want to tissue. This is the tail, basically the stabilizer and the elevator. Very thin. I think I mentioned it already before. It doesn't have profile or anything, but I'm going to go with it because it's part of the design. And then this would be actually quite a straightforward tissue exercise. I would put grey on the bottom, green on the top, and then figure out how to, if I don't think I've glued in the surfaces yet, so then probably split them. I might do it all together in one, then split and things like that. So quite a straightforward thing. The only challenge here is that if I shrink the tissue, it might warp. So when I shrink the tissue, I have to make sure that I somehow lay it flat and put some weights around it. For tissue covering, it's probably best to watch Cliff on his videos, but I'll try to do this. That's going to be one of the parts. And then the big part is what I finished in the previous chapter of this series, is the wing. So the wing and the aileron. So this is going to be the biggest challenge. I have to make sure I have enough tissue, because I did have at least some grey and some green, but I might need to go to the shop and get some more. Typically what we do, we start with the bottom side, so it's going to be grey, and it's going to have to go in panels. I'll separate the aileron so that I can do then the panels basically one by one. I might do this big lower panel, I don't know if you can see it. No, you can't see it. So I might do here one panel here, let's say up to the servo. That's one big section. Then another section maybe here up to the centerpiece. Maybe the centerpiece will be separate, because on top of it, I don't know how I'll do that actually, because the oil cooler comes up to here somehow. So I might just need to do then the front part, or maybe I just leave it as is, waiting then for the build of the fuselage, and then the same of course on the other side. Now the first thing before doing this, other than building the structure, I have to make sure that it's sanded. Sanding is a process that takes like a lot of steps, at least for me. Just now holding it, I noticed that there's a little blob of glue sticking out here a little bit, so it's a bit annoying. So I'm going to have to sand it down. Once it's tissued, there's no going back basically. You can of course go back, you can remove the tissue, sand it and things like that, but it's then very awkward. So before I actually start to do the tissue, I'm going to once again go through all the connecting points, all the crossings, and try to sand down everything, that it's as smooth as possible, because if not it's going to tear the tissue and it's going to look worse than usual, let's say, or worse than it should, let's say like that. So anyhow, that's basically the introduction with the color scheme that I want to go for, and the first steps. So then the next thing will be to take out the tissue and start to do actually the sections and do the tissue, and I'll show you then also how I do that. So now I have found the tissue. I am going to need to buy some more green tissue, but I have at least something to start with. So I'm going to start with the grey tissue, but before, what are the instruments or the tools that I'll be using? So a sharp knife, typically a new one. This is when I start to tissue, the moment to use a very sharp one. In this case I mark it with an N, because I still have the other one which is already blunt, but I can still use it for wood. So I'll be switching them around as I do wood and tissue. A pencil sometimes, just in case. I'm going to use a brush. Typically it's an old brush that's already fading away, but I can still use it. Maybe scissors, and the magic mix, which is one of these film canisters that I have, with water and glue. Basically I aim at the 50-50, but I eyeball it, right? So it's a water and a glue mix. I did use the glue stick in the past, but somehow with humidity it tended to unstick, and I have the feeling that the water glue mix with the normal white wood glue actually holds on a little better. And being wet, then it's easier to shape in the tissue around. So that being said, then the next step is to choose what side of the tissue. I never know, so I just leave the outside. It tends to roll up, the ones that I want, what I get. So I use basically the piece to stretch it out. Now with this, I've got it on the cutting mat, right? And what I'm going to do with this tail surface, I'm just going to hold it down, and I'm going to cut quite close. It doesn't need to be very close, because then I'll be able to trim with the scissors or with the cutting knife itself. I'm going to cut the shape out. Another way would be also to draw it with a pencil and then to cut it, but I'm going to try to kind of, as it's a sharp knife, try to do it like of the, let's say, freehand cutting, if there's such a word, and cut the shape of the tissue, the shape of the piece on the tissue. It's kind of the trailing edge. Then this is the stabilizer. Then the middle part actually I might not need to tissue. I will tissue it, and then maybe I need to untissue it. I'll see. Depends how good it sticks. And we typically do, or I learned to do the bottom side first, because then the top side can wrap over the bottom side, and then it looks a little bit neater and more aerodynamic on top of it. So there, so I cut that out. Still not there. Have to figure out how to do this without cutting myself. I do leave maybe, I don't know, quarter of an inch, maybe less. No, it's like an eighth of an inch, so like 3-4 millimeters excess, so that it's enough to wrap around, but not too much, because I don't want it being influencing the color of the green that will come on top. And here I can't see exactly where the other cut was, and you can't see then anything because I'm covering it up probably. But now hopefully, if I did it well, then the piece almost pops out. I say almost because it doesn't, right? There. Didn't quite get the corner. Tissue is very difficult to work, at least for me, because it's all very messy. The good thing is that it can be repaired, right? So there I have then the remains of the tissue. This I'll then trim down because I probably won't be able to use those remains. And then the process is to need to hold this down somehow, so it would be good maybe also to put some weight, but I can use maybe the scissors and things like that. The process is going to be to have here top, so you're going to put it on the bottom with the brush. I shake this a little bit, and then make all the edges that I want to glue, wet them with the water and glue mix, right? So let me do it over here that I don't drip over the tissue. And here I'm going to, in the end I'm going to split this because this is a moving surface, so I am going to put water glue mix around, but I'm not going to put it into the small struts, because then when it shrinks, then it's good if it can somehow stretch around. So this relatively liberally, because the wood does suck up quite a lot of the water, but at the same time it has to be quite fast, because if I don't do it fast enough, I'll find that it dries up before I manage to put the piece down. It's always tempting to use like big sheets, because it feels easier and less connecting points and things like that, but on the other hand there's more risk of them wrinkling up in one way or another or not sticking down properly. So let's see if I manage to do it somehow in a fluid way. Let's see how I hold it. This is just water and glue, so I don't really need to be afraid of touching it. It's not like CA, and it just wipes off afterwards. So here I've got also a plank, which is where the control horn will eventually go. So let me just wet it all. I push it away, and hopefully without breaking anything or wrinkling anything up, I managed to put the tissue on it. Hold it down for a bit, and it is relatively fast because it is water, and as I say, the wood will suck up the humidity quite fast. And I think even the wood sucking up the humidity is bending the whole thing up. Don't know if you can see it, but it's bending the whole thing up. That's the problem with having very thin wood. So that's basically then the procedure now, to wait for it to dry. It doesn't need to dry for very long. The good thing also is that as the tissue does also is kind of permeable to the liquid, to the water, then I can still put a little bit more on it if I feel I need it. I think I got a little bit short here, not quite accurate as I wanted it, but I think it should be fine, because then I'll cover it with the top one, right? The top one is going to require much more precision. So I might do it in 2 pieces actually, thinking of it. And maybe also here down the seam, which is the trailing edge and the leading edge of the elevator itself, and the trailing edge of the stabilizer. Here maybe didn't quite actually touch. As you can see, if I make it wet, then it becomes kind of instantly transparent. Time for some updates and next steps. Here is the bottom part of the stabilizer and elevator. I still haven't split it, and I've also done the top part. So basically I didn't even shrink it. I just went over it, I glued it on, and then I put on some clear lacquer. Sometimes I just paint it with the water glue mix, because it's, let me shake it already, because that's also a good way, kind of a dope replacement. But I didn't want it to warp or anything, and my fear was that as it's very thin, that once the tissue is wet, it might sag, it might actually touch the other side, right? So I didn't want to do that. No, I wanted to avoid that. So first I did the bottom side. I also put the clear lacquer, and then I went ahead and I did the top part. I removed the tissue from the central part, because that's where I believe it's going to glue onto the fuselage. So I want that somehow clear so that the glue can stick to the wood. And then the next step on this, well, clear lacquer was, I think, 3 layers, something like that. The top, as you can see, is got a little bit of a wrinkle, which I'm annoyed at, but it is what it is. These models have wrinkles. And then the next step is going to be to split with a sharp knife, split the tissue so that actually the elevator can move up and down. Once I do that, I'll be able to separate it all together, and then also glue in the hinges there. They're just in place, but they're not glued. But I'm going to leave that then for later. So that is then the elevator. And now let me put it aside. And then the more interesting part, maybe more interesting part, or more complicated part, is then to go ahead and start with the wing. Now, for me, the temptation is that as we have a big surface, why not do one big sheet, right? Like, would be nice and would look good, but in my experience it hasn't always worked so well. So what I'm going to do, I'm going to start with the bottom, so it's going to be the grey tissue, and I'm going to separate it in sections. So I'm going to do a section which is this part of the wing. I'm going to remove now also the aileron, and I'm thinking if I'll do also the wingtip. I think here I can do the wingtip because it's flat. I can do it all in one piece. For the top part I'll do it separately because it is a little bit curved. So I'll probably take a piece of tissue that's going to go from here to here, probably the full size, and then I'm going to cut out the aileron section. Once I do that, then it's going to be maybe I'll do the other wingtip, and then I'll do the center section, maybe also in 2 sections. I'm not sure if to leave the bottom part, the central part, still clear or not. Maybe yes, maybe it's not needed because that's going to be in the fuselage. No, actually it does need to be clear, but I'm going to maybe leave it uncovered because then I might need to, when I glue it onto the fuselage, I might need to get at things there. So might leave the center section then as another section. So it's going to be 1 section and 2 sections per wing, and then of course then the aileron is also going to be bottom section and top section. So I'm going to do now the bottom. What wing is this? This is the left hand corner. I've once again sanded it or reviewed again the sanding, and now what I have to do is I need to remove the aileron ever so carefully to not either break or lose anything. And this is my worry always, that I might lose things, right? So there's an aileron construction, and I also have to do then the tissue on that. So I'm going to put it aside that I don't lose it. That would be annoying. A lot of work went into that. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take out my cutting board. I've already got the sharp blade on, and what I'm going to do, if I don't bump into you, so let's see. Alright, it's difficult enough without the recording it, but recording makes it even more difficult. So let me then clean this up. I don't need this. Probably I might use it then for scraps later. Now I need to find a place or a spot. If it's straight, it's good. Like I try to be as accurate as I can, especially on the joining, where it's actually on this side, where the tissue is going to overlap. If it's on a rib, it's almost invisible. Like you might see it a little bit darker because it's two sheets, but it's close to invisible. Like, so it's as accurate as one can get it, then even better, right? So, and I want to get also the wingtip in there, so I'm going to use the factory cut. It's always going to be better than my own cut, and let's see how I can get it that I can use the tissue, right? So there it is. This should tissue onto that, and down here and down here. So now tracing it with the pen, I'm going to go, I don't need to go too far out because I need to cut it. One of the challenges is always to cut it then accurately and cleanly, not only accurately but that it's not jagged. Here I think I'm okay with cutting it. I'm just going to put the knife at the leading edge and cut it, because then the top part is going to be the green color, and that's the part that is more interesting. So I'm going to do it quite close without cutting into the wood, of course. There I went out a little bit. This I don't really mind. I don't know if you can see anything, but yeah, I can remove that. And now this other part, again for the wingtip, it doesn't need to be too big because it's a flat piece. And the wingtip from the top I'll do it in a separate section, because the wingtips, as they are curved somehow in all directions, then it's more challenging. So you have to put them over, then trim them around. I might show you that. So there is this. I still have another sheet of the grey color, the grey tissue, which I will need, and also need another green one, which I don't have yet. I just have to find time to go to the shop and get it. So that's the piece that is going to go on it, and I have to somehow figure out how to keep it as flat as I can. And of course I didn't put much margin of error, so let's see how I do this. This is where transparent rulers can be good, right? So let's see if I can just put it there, hope it holds. It didn't. Actually I don't need this now, it can be, the table is cleaner. As you can see, this is fiddly, and one of the reasons why I do this now and not at the end, with other models I just did the tissue at the end, but tissue is so fiddly, and I can, probably one of the parts I don't enjoy as much. I enjoy more the wood building. I am enjoying it now gradually, but so there I'm going to put that down. And now let's take this sanding. It went away. But as I was saying, like the tissue part is more fiddly, so I do it in between. So I've done now quite a lot of wood building, so now I'm going to try to do the tissue part, and this is just escaping. Fifth attempt. Sometimes you say third attempt is a charm. No, with me like more like the fifth attempt. Attempt is the charm. There. So kind of flat. I need something else. Let's see what I can use. Maybe some tape. There. I already moved it. Sixth attempt. Oh well, it's part of the fun. Normally I do this like listening to some videos also, but also it's also good just to be with one's own thoughts about life, the meaning of life, and destiny and all that stuff. Right? So, and here is the eyeballed mix of water and glue. On this part also, I've got here the servo. Here's where the servo arm sticks out, taking it off. So I'll be gluing also all around here, and then once it's kind of finished, then I'll be cutting it out. So an important thing there is that it's flat and it's a bit easier to put on. So now it's the job of putting all the glue. there, and the balsa is quite absorbent, so I try to be as generous as I can. Now the moment of truth, to be as accurate as one can. You are in the way, let me move you. There's a wrinkle there that I want to avoid. Okay. I don't know. Did I get it? Did I get it or didn't I? Now just hold it down. And the tissue actually should then, because it's wet, then the tissue actually sticks to the wood. Let's see if it didn't stick to the table also. It's sticking to the table. What a disaster. This has spelled disaster. Let's see if we can save it. Let's see if we can save it. So there's a chance of tearing. Okay. Might have saved it. Might have saved it. There's a wrinkle here. There's a wrinkle there that's going to be there. So when people like Cliff and the experts do it, it looks easy, doesn't it? But then when one tries it oneself, it isn't. Okay, so maybe that wrinkle, using the finger gently. Worst case scenario, we're still at the point that we can just rip it off and do it again, right? But as the model goes further, or as it's built more and more, I think it's more difficult to do that. Like to rebuild a wing, for example, is a major thing. Maybe something goes wrong or it breaks. Or if you build the wrong wing, sometimes it happens, right? Like you build two right wings or two left wings. So there it's kind of stuck there, and now maybe with a little bit more of the water and glue. Here there's no risk of being too generous because the tissue does permeate, is that the word, through, and just to make sure that it's stuck. And I don't want it to shrink yet, that's why I'm not wetting the bits between the ribs or anything like that. I just want it to glue to the wood and hold its position. So you can see here the wingtip, that you can see it is a little bit too much, but that's okay because that can either be trimmed off or then cut little snips with the scissors and then glued in also, so that's no issue. And this will take just maybe half an hour or something, it doesn't take too long, and then one can come and trim it off and then shrink it. And then here the question is going to be not to shrink or not to shrink. Yeah, I am going to shrink, but should I shrink with the water and the glue, which I might, or directly with the lacquer, which is more messy and smelly? So I might actually with this already go with the glue. With the elevator I was worried about warping. In the end it didn't warp actually, it was relatively straight. With this I'm not half as worried with the warping because it's a big structure, right? So I don't think it's going to warp. So now it's, my finger's stuck here. Now it's to wait for that to dry basically, and then do the same thing, trim it, and do the same thing with the rest of the underside of the wing, and do the upper side of the wing. And once I have that, I'm just thinking if I should shrink already now or wait. Probably better to wait, and then I can, there are different tactics to shrinking. Like sometimes you can shrink it like now as you go along, okay, or you shrink it then when it's all complete. Also maybe shrink maybe one section at a time so that it doesn't warp. That's also something, a tactic I was doing. I think on the Wellington I was doing that, just one rib bay somehow at a time, and maybe do the top and the bottom at the same time that it doesn't warp. But I think this is sturdy enough that it shouldn't warp, right? So anyhow, that's it for now. I'll be doing then the rest of the underside, and might shrink that, and then I'll do the top part, which is a little bit more challenging because it's rounded, so the tracing and things like that, it's more difficult. But let me continue with this. It'll take me another couple of days to go through it, and I'll come back. So finally, after some time of inactivity on the Mustang, I continue with the tissue covering. So I don't know what I've shown you already. So the underside is covered but not shrunk, and now I'm going to proceed to do the top side. That's going to be in green. I did manage to get some more tissue, but unfortunately it's a slightly different tone. So I hope it is not too noticeable, and especially when I paint it over with the water and glue mix. So I've got the water and glue mix, I've got everything I think at hand. I've got to switch over the blade because I was using it for something else. So I go here for my sharpest blade, and the process is very much like the underside of the wing, but bearing in mind that it has the camber, I think it's called, right? So we've got to give it a little bit more space. Also, the accuracy of the cut is also more critical because it's going to be more visible probably, and also the leading edge on the leading edge with the lower tissue, it's a little bit messy. Here for the top part I need to be a little bit more precise, I think. So yeah, it's a little bit of a challenge. So as before, I'm going to try to, I've got to decide what side to use. Maybe that side, that's a bit darker, or what's smoother. This one is smoother. This one, I don't know what is smoother. Maybe this one is, right? So I've got to mark it somehow, maybe with a pencil. And again, I'm going to take it in panels, right? So one panel is going to be basically the aileron section. So from this place to this place, and here I am going to leave the wingtip on its own, because I'm going to do like another strip there, right? So if I just present this somehow, I'll use the factory cut that is probably more accurate than anything I can do. Put it there, and then here I'm going to mark it. It's a bit wasting, right? What if I do... yeah, but I can't help it. Always try to save as much material as possible, but the tissue is actually relatively cheap, like very cheap. So there's maybe no point in saving there too much. So I'm going to mark here with the pencil up to where I want it. And then here also at the front, and go kind of way over, way past it, because then I can trim down. Okay, so that's somehow marked. Now I can get the wing out of the way without damaging it. And now with the ruler, cut out the panel, basically, right? So I call it panel because somehow I pretend that I'm using aluminium, but I'm not, right? And I've got to look for the marks. There I can see the marks. So it's up to this one. I did not mark here, right? But it was, where was it? As with wood, measure twice, cut once, they say. Not what I typically do, which is cut twice, measure once, right? So I don't know up to where this is going to go. Boop, 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 boop. Yeah, more or less up to the corner. Okay. I know this might be tedious, but then it's also good that you observe that it takes its time, but that's also the point, right? This is not a rush, not a race. I'd rather have more tissue than less. So up to there, and then the other pencil mark, I can see it. The good thing of the tissue and the pencil, it can also be rubbed out, but typically I don't need to because I mark it in a place that then I'll cut it off. But if needed, it can also be rubbed out with a normal rubber. So more or less, we should have, say more or less, but I didn't cut, right? Also lesson learned, cut properly. everything okay. Let's see this one. Always a little bit awkward to cut sometimes. Oopala, and I wrinkled it, but I think I didn't tear it. And as I say, it's cheap, so even if something gets torn, it's not the end of the world. When the sheet is new, like the sheet of paper, the tissue is new, then it's a bit more awkward because it's a bigger piece. But let's see. Yeah, there. So there, we have one panel separated. Now I have to get rid of this. And now I have the panel, I think you can see it. Fits on there. And I've chosen this side. I think it's smoother. I'm not sure if that's the right one or not, but I never know. And in theory there's also grain to the tissue. I know that Cliff always talks about grain. I never figure out what way it goes. I think if you tear it, then you realize either it tears or it doesn't. But yeah, I need to get better at that also. And I suppose that the grain would then go longitudinally, if that is a word. Let's see, so I'm going to place it where I think I'm going to want it. Then it will wrap over the leading edge. That's the important part. And then try to trim it off that way, right? So here it's going to go. So what I'm going to do, as always, as before, I'm going to, with the water and the glue mix, that I hope hasn't dried up completely, basically wet all the edges. Only the edges, because then when we shrink it, we want it to stretch across also the different panels. And when I get to the stretching, then I'll also mention some considerations or some thoughts and some experiments, and we'll see. So anyhow, now I dose it quite a lot. It doesn't really matter. Actually, in the past I used to do this with the wood itself, with whatever wood structure. I probably read it somewhere or saw something on YouTube. I would put like a couple of coats, at least one coat, into the wood, because the water will be sucked in by the wood, and if the water has glue in it, then in theory it also reinforces it. Then I think somebody said that it doesn't really make a difference. If you crash and it's gone, but so I stopped doing it. But there's no harm in putting the water and the glue into the wood. If you do it too much, then it can deform it a little bit, of course, right? But I think it won't with this. And there I think we have it around the edges. And now to place, I can't understand it. Now to place this in a way that is as aligned as possible. Okay. I'm sure there are better techniques, but basically with the fingers gently squishing it down and stretching it as much as one dares without tearing it. And then once it's on, and maybe putting another layer. The tissue does soak in the water glue mix also, so it also goes through it. It helps stick it down. So to make sure that it's well stuck there, because then when we shrink it, it has to hold on to its edges. If not, it might tear itself apart. And I think I'm very, very much on the edge here, but well, I think it's going to be okay. So that is step one. Let's see if you can see this. Let me move the wing. There you are. So that is step one. Top wing panel on it. I'll do the rest of the wing down to that end, and then I'll come back and trim this and decide as up to where I want it to wrap over, probably up to the bottom of the leading edge, and so basically trim. And then after that, once it's all trimmed and everything, then it'll be the shrinking process, which will be probably, I think I'll do probably water first and then the glue cover. So I won't bore you with the rest of the wing, as it's going to be pretty much the same process, and I'll catch up with you when I'm on the next step. And here I have the full wing already covered, and basically I did as I showed, and then I did a lot of the trimming, both with the knife, with the sharp knife, and with the scissors one strategy that I came at, unfortunately very late in the process, is to use these small nail scissors. I don't know if you can see them, but they're a little bit curved up, so that's good at getting at the edges somehow. The challenge I always have, in spite of using sharp knives, is to have this leading edge. I don't know if you can see it, but it's not quite straight, not as straight as I would like it to be, let's say. But anyhow, I think it's going to be, it's good enough. It is what it is, let's say it like that. I've also put on the wing tips, and maybe an important consideration to do here that I often do wrong is to just, especially on the trailing edge, to just put the glue or the water glue on the very edge, because if it goes into the flat part of the trailing edge, then the tissue is very likely to stick, and then it just doesn't look so good. I think I've got a little bit of that happening here on the underside. You can't see it, a little bit here, and it can still happen. So that is actually then the next point of consideration is I could either just go with the water glue mix and brush it on, and that would actually then wet it, it would then dry, it would get taut, and then do a couple of layers of that. The worry with that is particularly that when it gets wet, it does sagging quite a lot before it gets taut, so that would be a risk, because that being glue, actually water and glue, might actually stick it. So what I'm thinking of doing this time to try to avoid that is to just use the water spray and to kind of cover it with a bit of like mist it over, and wait for it to shrink, and once it's shrunk, then go ahead and use the water glue mix as a kind of dope. So that's what I'm going to do now. Then there's also the strategy. This one it's quite a sturdy wing, so I don't think I'm risking any kind of warping. If there is some warping, I would do it maybe just with a partial section, maybe top and bottom and things like that. But I think in this case there's no risk of that, so I hope. So let's see if I can do this without getting things wet that I shouldn't. So I'm going to start from this way, just misting it over, getting it wet, and going across. And also another thing, I have put on some, because I've got the servers installed, I've put on some masking tape over the terminals so that they don't get wet. Don't think much would happen if they do, but better safe than they have to rip the whole thing up, right? So let's now just mist it over, just water in there. See, it gets dark immediately. And what I'm going to do is do the top part of the wing first, both wings actually. You see, in some places it was better, let's say, more taut than in others. So I'm hoping that with the water it gets nice and taut and that it doesn't tear. If it tears, then I have to put patches on it. So basically that's it. So see, now it's wet and soggy. As it gets soggy, it sags down. So now I just have to wait. It would actually dry quite fast, maybe half an hour, 1 hour, whatever. I'm going to leave it overnight, and then once that is dry, then, and hopefully not torn, I'll do the underside of the wing. And once that is done, then I start with the process of painting it over with the water glue mix, kind of a cheap man's dope. So let's see how that goes. So I've already started to use the water glue mix. I did mix more. I wanted to have more because it's going to be quite a lot of surface to cover, so I'm mixing it. And basically first of all, let me show you what it looks like after the stretch with the water. It looks actually surprisingly good for me. Normally it's not so good, so I probably did it kind of okay. As you can see, the trailing edge is quite clean. There's a little bit of gap there that I knew about. It actually looks nice and smooth, so it doesn't look completely like as if it were tissue. And then on the underside, typically the underside it's flatter, so it is actually usually a little bit better. Now I've already started, as I say, with one wing. So the left wing, I've already put the water glue mix, a thin layer. The whole point is to have like 2-3 layers of actual glue on it, right, to seal it off. It has become a little bit more wrinkled, so not so nice, but nevertheless it's still needed, right? So have to live with it. I've put just one coat. I'll be putting at least 2. I don't know if you can see it, but there are some gaps. Like when I brush it, it's not that it's not covered, but it's not maybe covered as much. So with 2, maybe even 3 layers, one makes sure that the whole thing is covered. Same theory as with dope, but not half as smelly, well, not smelly at all actually. So, and to do it, let me show you then how I go about it. I'm not sure if to do maybe the underside, or I'll do the top side because it's maybe a little bit more visible. And just putting in, as I say, a very thin layer, so I can do a little bit that you can follow along. Can you see this? Here, I'm working here. Yeah, you can see it. So just a little bit with the brush, and then a thin layer of the water and glue mix. And there we are. Basically, that's one of the sections, and now I'm going to leave it to dry, and it will still shrink a little bit more. Let me put everything aside, that I don't knock this over. That would be a major catastrophe. So let me lift it. There you see. So this has been shrunk with water, but not with water glue, and this already has the water glue. So it goes darker. It starts to get a little bit of a shine, but it does destroy a little bit the nice surface. But as we say, we need to have somehow the tissue protected, because not just humidity alone will wrinkle it up. I do have some unfortunate experiences with that. So now what I'm going to do with that is just wait for that to dry. Then I do this other section. Then I do the bottom wing that you can see there, and then I repeat it. And then when I repeat it, then there's still at least one more step that I hope I can show you. And finally, time to wrap up this video. So what I've done the 2 layers of water glue on all sides, on all wings. And then what I did, and I did not do it on camera because if not I would spray everything, I put 1 layer of clear lacquer. Here we have clear lacquer, it also says it in Hungarian. Clear lacquer over the tissue. So like that it gets a nice kind of semi-gloss look, which is nice, and it's also hopefully a little bit more humidity resistant, not water resistant. If it goes into the water it's over, but humidity resistant. Also, one thing that I did, I don't know if you can see it, hopefully not, I put some patches, because the tissue when it dries it can actually tear. It hadn't actually torn, but it was, you could see already the tension lines. So I put a patch here and another one somewhere else, can't remember where. And that's with the trick of not to cut it straight, but to actually tear it, and like that it actually merges in quite well. So, and also of course, then I did also the ailerons, that I had the bottom side but not the top side, so the top side is there. I've hinged them in and glued them in already with super glue on the hinges, and then the next step would be to cut out the hole here, and then you can see it, and that's where the servo is, and put in the rods, which I do have them, so maybe I should do it, that I don't lose the components. And with that, pretty much the wing is done. What it will miss is then some decorations, some markings, which I think is going to be some white lines, top and bottom, and then on one side, not on both sides, but just on one, so just one star and stripe on each side. I think it goes on the left one, I'm not sure, I'll have to look it up. A white stripe with in the blue circle, and the blue and white stripes beside it, right? So that's going to be also challenging itself, kind of a project on how to do that in itself. So, but anyhow, structurally wise, the wing is complete, and now the next step is going to be to start to build the fuselage, which is another huge part of the whole thing, with the electronics and all these things, right? So anyhow, so that's it. I think this video might be a little bit too long, but at least you see the whole process of how I put the tissue on, and it doesn't look too bad. Some wrinkles, but acceptable, especially for my quality. Thank you everybody as always for watching and for following along, and I'll see you next time.